It is 800-941-SEAN. If you want to be a part of the program, the Let Not Your Heart Be Troubled Twitter Army Brigade to save America 24/7. 365 is at Sean Hannity. Hope you will join the discussion. All right, joining us now is the great senator from the state of Florida. Marco Rubio is back with us. Senator, how are you? Welcome back.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. What do you think about this gun grab?
Look, first of all, I think what we're missing, and the president's missing the opportunity here to talk about the real problem in America, and the real problem is not guns. The real problem is violence. And we, the serious conversation about violence would ask, what are the cultural factors at play? What are the things going on in our society that are contributing to the violence? I mean, that's the real issue that we should be discussing, and instead they're focused on things they've always wanted to do as a movement. The left has always wanted to infringe upon the Second Amendment, and they now see an opportunity to try to do that. But by their own admission yesterday, when they introduced these series of measures that they want to have passed, none of those would have prevented what happened in Connecticut. That horrible.
None of them. Isn't that amazing?
Tragedy. And so the result is you ask yourself, well, if the reason why we're doing all this is because of what happened in Connecticut, but everything you're proposing would do nothing to have prevented Connecticut, then what this really is about is that your desire to get a few things done that you've always wanted to do but now see the opportunity to do. And that's unfortunate because that means we're not focused on the stuff we should be focused on.
Yeah, no, all good points. What do you make of these hostages that have been taken? We don't know where they are. There's been apparently an attempt to rescue them. We don't know the status of all of that, except that we know that some people have died. What do you know about it?
Well, I don't know much more than what you've seen in the media. Obviously, we understand that Islamic fundamentalists and terrorists have spread into North Africa and into that unstable territory. That's kind of where the fight has emerged now, and this is going to be a long process. I mean, the war on terror is real. It's like a balloon. You push one place, it'll bulge out somewhere else. And as we've increased efforts in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan, they've moved on to North Africa and places like that. That's what Libya was about to some extent, and that's what you're seeing now in places like Mali and Algeria. And so this is a real deal that's not going to go away anytime soon. We're going to have to be committed to the long haul on this. And unfortunately, incidents like the one we saw yesterday, in some ways, show that that these al-Qaeda elements in North Africa are organized enough now that they're capable of conducting operations of this kind. And that's just a new challenge that we're going to have to face.
President and the Democrats have used the issue of immigration as a wedge issue and an attempt to demonize Republicans, conservatives, and I resent this, as people who are anti-minority, anti-Hispanic. Every election cycle we see Democrats, they play the race card, class warfare card, they divide Americans. And after the election, I made a comment that this issue needs to be put to rest. A lot of people, and the first thing I did say, secure the borders first, and then I said, then at that point we can deal with the issue of people are here. I don't think they're going to be rounded up and sent back to the countries that they came from, even though they entered this country illegally.
Right. Well, look, Sean, a couple things about that. Number one, and you're right about, insinuating that people are anti-immigrant or anti-immigration. And I've always said conservatism is pro-legal immigration, as most Americans are. Legal immigration is a good thing for America, as long as it's done in a rational and responsible way that's good for the immigrant and good for the country. Second, we are a sovereign nation that has a right to enforce its immigration laws, to have immigration laws, and there is no right to illegally immigrate to the United States. I think there are three things that we need to do. The first is modernize our legal immigration system and make it work better. That means agriculture worker program, a temporary guest worker program, and that functions well, that obviously protects American workers, especially in times of high unemployment. The second thing that has to be done is enforcement, and that does mean getting operational control of the border, and that means having a workplace enforcement system, whether that's E-Verify or something like it. And it also means, by the way, tracking visitors to our country, because 40% of our illegal immigration are people that enter legally and then overstay the visas.
Can I ask you on enforcement, because I agree that we've got to modernize our legal immigration system, and I've been saying it for years. I think one of the problems that we have is people have to wait 6, 7, 8, 9 years before they get any movement from our government and say they have family members that they want to come visit in the United States. That's problematic. We ought to have a way of being able to do background searches faster. And the people, by the way, that want to come, they should pay for it all. We shouldn't put the burden on the taxpayers. But as the enforcement goes, to me, I don't want to go through a long, drawn-out immigration debate and then still have vulnerabilities at our borders. And it's not necessarily even people that want to come to America because they want a job. I'm worried about terrorists coming into this country.
Right. Well, that's actually what the border is really about, is security as much as anything else. I mean, the way to really stem illegal immigration is the workplace enforcement, because the overwhelming majority of people that come here undocumented do so in search of work. And by the way, workplace enforcement is going to be good for the immigrant and good worker because it protects the value of their labor. But what you're talking about is true. We can't just do the immigration stuff and ignore the enforcement stuff as it's been done in the past, because we're going to wind up right back here again. Now, look, the third part of this is the reality that we have 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 million people in this country that are undocumented. I'm not happy about that. I don't think anyone is. I wish that weren't the case, but it is the case. And so the question now is, what are we going to do about it? Because these folks are not, the vast majority of them are going to be here for the rest of their lives with or without documents. And the way I think we approach it is with the first fundamental principle that we're not going to do anything that's unfair to the people who are doing it the right way, and we're not going to do anything that incentivizes people to come here undocumented in the future. The principle that I've put out there to begin to consider is the following. People need to come forward. If you've committed a serious crime in the United States, you're going to be deported. If you have not, you're going to have to pay a fine. You're going to have to pay your back taxes. You're going to have to undergo a comprehensive background check. You're going to have to do community service and know English and have been here for a significant period of time that shows that you've been acclimated to our society and so forth and assimilated. You do all these things, and what you get is a work permit, a legalization. Now, you're not a permanent resident of the U.S., so you will not qualify for any federal benefits. You won't qualify for welfare or student aid or anything like that, but you'll be able to work and you'll be able to be legal, and you're going to have to stay in that status for a significant but, reasonable period of time. And after you've complied with all of that during that period of time, then the only thing that you get would be not a special pathway or amnesty. What you would get is the opportunity to apply for legal residence in the United States the same way anybody else from anywhere else in the world would have to do it. And that means you'd have to get in line, you'd have to qualify for the visa you're applying for, and then you'd get a green card. And then, of course, once you have a green card, you have to wait another 5 years before you can even apply for citizenship. And by the way, I don't think any of that begins until we can certify that the border security progress has been real, that enforcement mechanism is in place, that we're tracking visitors to our country, especially when they exit. And, that I think is a reasonable approach to the process that won't be unfair to the people who have done it the right way and will not incentivize people to do it this way again in the future.
I'm listening very, very closely. The most important thing, Senator, in my mind, is what you're saying about that we have secured the border. Because if otherwise we're going to be dealing with this 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, but it's never going to end. And we have a national security problem. We have enemies that still want to destroy us. I know people think that the biggest border issue is the fact that people come over to America. So what you're saying is this is not amnesty, but you're not, on the other hand, people that have entered the country illegally after they pay a fine, after they've had a background check, after they go through a process, a very long process, that they would then be allowed to have a legal work permit in the country. In other words, they'd be given an opportunity to come out and basically admit that they entered the country illegally.
Yeah, you're going to get a work permit, and you're going to have to pay the consequences of having come here illegally, but you're not going to be a permanent resident during that period of time. And now, it's not good for our country to have 10 million people that are permanently barred from ever being a part of our permanent future. And that's why eventually, if they comply with all those conditions during that probationary phase, for lack of a better term, what they'll get is not a special pathway. They don't get citizenship. All they would get is the opportunity to apply for permanent residency, for a green card, through the same system that anyone in the world can apply through. But that requires you to get in line behind everyone who applied before you, and that requires you to qualify for the visa that you're applying for. And at that point, all we've done is give you access to the same system that anybody else would have to use, doing it the right way or the legal way.
Where are your fellow senators on this bill? Where are the Democrats on this bill? Have you spoken to President Obama about the bill?
No, I haven't, and I've spoken to my colleagues. And look, I'll tell you the fundamental reality that we face. People are worried about doing anything that's going to lead to this problem all over again. In essence, what they don't want to support is something that 10 years from now we're right back here again, and neither do I. I don't ever want to have to deal with this issue again. But they also recognize that we do have this issue. We have to confront it and solve it in a responsible but pragmatic and humane way. And that's what we're trying to work on. Now, obviously, other people have different ideas that maybe will improve upon the principles that I've outlined. I think it's important for people that, folks don't qualify for government benefits when they're on this system. Our government can't afford any more of that. I want to make sure that we're not being unfair to the people that are coming legally, because our message can't be come illegally. It's cheaper and faster. All these things have to be worked through, and that's why having a trigger, in essence, ensuring that process that I've described does not begin until we've certified the border security and the workplace enforcement and so forth, is so important.
How firm does the border has to be secured first? How firm is that in the language of the bill?
Well, we don't have a bill. These are principles, but I think it has to be firm. I mean, we have to make sure that we don't repeat the errors of the past where, 2-3 million people were granted permanent access to the United States, but the enforcement mechanisms never happened, and so 20 years later, 15 years later, that number has quadrupled. So I think that's incredibly important. And by the way, you've touched it on the border. I mean, look, the border is an immigration problem, no doubt about it. And I'm not in favor of a housekeeper coming across the border illegally. I'm not in favor of that. But I'm much more worried about the terrorist or the gun runner or the drug smuggler or the human trafficker coming across the border.
Which is happening. I've been down there. I don't know if you know this. I went down there about 5 times and out with Border Patrol. I was actually there during the arrest of gang members. I've been in the drug warehouses that are packed from floor to ceiling, massive warehouses. I've seen the tunnels from from Mexico into San Diego. I mean, sophisticated smuggling rings that exist. And a lot of times it's either human trafficking, drug trafficking. Gangs are coming across the border and creating a dangerous situation for Americans.
There's no doubt, and that's why border security is really as much a national security issue as it is an immigration one. The real mechanism that will help with illegal immigration is the workplace enforcement. In essence, the idea that you're not going to be able to find a job in the U.S. if you don't have legal status, that's critically important. That's got to be a big part of this as well.
I got to be honest. I think it's probably the most thoughtful bill that I have heard heretofore. Why do I think, regardless of what you propose that would solve the problem, Democrats are going to demagogue it?
Well, that may be the case, but our job as policymakers and as conservatives is to outline a proposal that solves the problem without violating our principles, and ultimately that's good for America and good for Americans. Yeah. And that's what we're working on right now. And like I said, look, there are a lot of valid concerns, and people have input, and we want to hear that, and we want to work with them to make it better. I don't pretend to have the answers to every issue, but I certainly wanted to give us something to be for, because this is an issue we want to get solved. We want to move on to the critical issues that confront our country, primarily the fact that we have a national debt that's bigger than our overall economy. We have a government that borrows 41 cents of every dollar that it spends, and it can't continue to do that. We have an economy that isn't growing fast enough and threatens the middle class. We have a U.S. that isn't clear about what its role in the world is in the 21st century because of poor leadership from the executive branch. These are real issues that we need to deal with because they're existential issues for our country and for its future.
I know you have to go. I was very happy to see when you did not go along with that fiscal cliff deal, one of only 5 senators that voted against it, if I'm correct, or Republican senators. I want to ask you, we're now facing the big debt battle that's coming, the debt ceiling issue, and then we have continuing resolutions issues. The body that you work in, the Senate, has not passed a bill, which is constitutionally something they are required to do by law in over 3 years. And we see the president is out there saying, well, you can't tie the raising of the debt ceiling to any issues involving spending cuts, which, by the way, is the way we've done this for the last 30 years.
Yeah. Well, Sean, look, think about this. The president basically held a press conference 3 days ago where he said that we have to raise the debt limit or we're going to default. What that means is that he thinks we have to borrow more money just to pay our bills. That alone should bother us. The admission that unless the federal government can borrow more money, we cannot pay our bills. I mean, if I went to you and said, hey, listen, I need to borrow more money because I can't pay my bills, that's a sign of a serious financial problem. And that's what our country's facing. And to continue to routinely raise the debt limit without addressing this major issue of spending in our country and the impact that it has on economic growth is really political malpractice to continue to do that. And so I think the debt limit is the opportune time to begin to confront the issue of our national debt and to just routinely raise it without having a significant and serious solution for these other problems is deeply problematic.
I spoke to Ross Perot today, and a friend of his has actually gone over the federal budget with a fine-tooth comb, a very, very bright guy. I don't know if he wants me to mention him, so I won't. But what he was saying is that we keep hearing $16 trillion in debt, and he said that's not even close to what the reality is. He said with unfunded liabilities, he said this country is closer to the $72 trillion mark in terms of obligations and debts that we have due.
Yeah, well, that's an astronomical number. When you look at where we're headed, and I think what he was probably referring to is that's how much we owe right now, but if you take the promises we've made and you calculate them out over the years, that's probably the figure he arrived at. And that's absolutely right. I mean, that's exactly where we're headed. A very simple demographic reality. We're going to have a lot less workers in comparison to retirees in this country, and you're going to owe them money that we're going to have to borrow to pay. That's why it's so critically important to save Medicare by restructuring the way it works for my generation.
You know, it's pretty amazing that there are so few people that see that it's wrong, morally repugnant and reprehensible to borrow 46 cents of every dollar and place the burden of debt. Now, the president was using these kids yesterday to make his point on gun control. I was hoping he would have turned to them and said, I want to apologize for raising, adding $6 trillion to the debt and putting this burden and breaking open your piggy banks and robbing you guys blind. I want to apologize for that while you were here.
Well, and it's not just that. I mean, that's obviously important. Here's what's also happening. The debt is hurting job creation. Every penny that's being lent to the government is a penny that's not being spent into our economy. It's not being spent at the place where you work, or it's not being spent at your business, or it's not being invested or lent to you so you could grow your business. This has real implications. And by the way, this growing national debt is scaring people from opening up a new business or expanding an existing business in America, which is contributing to our unemployment rate and the lack of middle-class growth.
Senator, you're a good man. It's a pleasure to talk to you every time you have a little time for us. We really appreciate it, and thank you so much for what you're doing. We'll stay in touch on the immigration issue, the budget, and everything else. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean, for having me on.